Hi everyone, I'm Xuanhan. You can also call me Jessica. I'm a part of ICY group and I'm currently doing my PhD researcher in University of Glasgow. And I will be guiding our conversation today. In a world where we are more connected than ever through technology, many people say they've never felt more alone. Loneliness has become a growing issue across society, affecting people of all ages and backgrounds. Before we start, I'd love for everyone to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name's Iman. I'm a member of the Intercultural Youth group, or ICY for short, a group that's based out of Glasgow museums. I am interested in art and museums and culture and heritage. The Intercultural Youth group is a youth group for young people of colour. It is for the global majority. They do an application process and we are the first cohort of the Intercultural Youth group.
Hi everyone, my name is Mukmina and I am a poet, freelance journalist, podcaster and youth advocate.
In today's episode, we are exploring loneliness, connection and well-being in modern life and thinking about the role that art and museums might play in these experiences. Our conversation is inspired by works shown at GOMA that touch on themes like urban isolations, intimacy, and maternal health. We will also be drawing on research about loneliness and social connections in the UK and around the world. Across this episode, we will explore three main questions. First, loneliness as a social and emotional issue. Second, how culture and art can help connect people. And finally, the role museum might play in supporting well-being and a sense of belonging. But loneliness isn't just something we read about in statistics. It is something many of us have felt in our own lives. So we'd like to bring this conversation closer to home. How have each of you experienced loneliness and what do you think has contributed to those feelings?
Loneliness is increasingly recognised as a major public health issue. Researchers often describe loneliness as the gap between the social relationships we want and the ones we actually have. When that gap becomes too wide, it can start to negatively impact our well-being. Studies link loneliness to higher risks of poor mental health, physical problems, and even increased mortality. Globally, there are 1 in 6 people that experience significant levels of loneliness, and ourselves as ICY group members, we can say that we've all experienced loneliness. This increase is largely due to factors such as the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and an uptake in remote working, an increased use of digital technologies leading to more screen time, and a reduction of community and social spaces where people can find connections. But loneliness isn't just something we read about in statistics, it's something many of us have felt in our own lives.
So in my experience, having graduated in 2023, since then, moving out of the university environment and kind of losing my university social circle, and so being in a position feeling very isolated and really having to try and build up those networks again from scratch. I've also changed careers, so I initially studied computer science at university, and since then I've pivoted into arts and media, and it was also quite difficult for me to establish a new professional network in the industry and help me to feel more connected, part of the arts community here in Scotland.
And I'm the same, with Momina as well. I'm from a science background. I did a degree in immunology and microbiology at Strathclyde, and I have found that through working in the corporate environment within those roles, I am more connected to art spaces, museums, and it was just about finding how I was going to be able to make myself more skilled in these environments and how I was going to get experience. In Britain, around 27% of adults report feeling lonely often, always, or some of the time. In Scotland specifically, where we are, loneliness adversely affects the older and younger people of society. In particular, people aged 75 and over, and then young people between the ages of 16 and 24. Those who live in deprived areas are also 20% more likely to experience loneliness and social isolation. So that's why it's important for groups to exist where they're specific for these demographics, because then how are we going to combat this loneliness and isolation?
But loneliness isn't only shaped by our personal relationships. It can also be influenced by our environment and the surroundings. For some people, cultural spaces like museums and galleries don't always feel welcoming or relatable. If you don't see your identity, your community, or your lived experiences reflect in these spaces, it can be harder to find a sense of connection there. When that happens, it can lead to a kind of cultural distance, where people feel that these institutions simply aren't meant for them, and so they choose not to engage with them at all.
If loneliness is one side of the story, then connection is the other. And research suggests that engaging with the arts can play an important role in bringing people together. So the Heart Survey, for example, found that participation in the arts can support social connection in adulthood. And so this is through not just viewing art in galleries, but also taking part in workshops and discussions and other creative activities. Through these different avenues, people have the chance to share their ideas and experiences with others, which increases feelings of connection and a sense of belonging. And the Mental Health Foundation also highlights that engaging in the arts can help people facing mental health challenges find a sense of community and build meaningful connections. One example of this in practice is the Scottish Mental Health Arts Festival. And this festival provides a platform for people to share their art inspired by mental health, and through an approach that brings together artistic practice, community engagement, and social action, they're able to create space for open discussion of mental health topics. In spite of all of this, not everyone feels able to engage with art and cultural spaces. And access to arts education and opportunities to engage with culture are still very unequal, and this can shape who feels comfortable or welcome in places like museums and galleries. And inequalities in access to arts education and cultural participation impact how people can feel if their identities are reflected in the spaces or not. And historically, art spaces have often been very exclusive and catering more to people with prior arts knowledge or coming from certain educational backgrounds or from particularly wealthy backgrounds as well.
For me, I'm a young South Asian person and I grew up in Glasgow. I've really benefited from Glasgow life and Glasgow museums. I'm also lucky in the aspects that my parents were very arty and were taking me to museums at a young age. But we are very lucky here where our museums are mostly free as well, so it makes them more accessible. Even if these spaces are free and accessible, how many people actually do feel that they feel welcomed in these spaces? And is it more angled at people from, I guess, wealthier backgrounds and from privatised educational backgrounds?
To continue on from that, a report from the Creative Industries Policy Evidence Centre summed this whole phenomenon up as, quote, "Inequalities in arts access reinforce the perception that the arts are an elite space." And some of the ways that arts institutions uphold this are through having complex rules and using jargon and various other practices that can exclude wider audiences. And so, for example, even if you go to a lot of museums in the UK, the exhibits are written completely in English, which can be a barrier to people who aren't as fluent in the language. And also, as well as this, the kind of language that is used, like the way that descriptions are worded, can also affect our perceptions. So for context, I'm Nigerian, I'm a first generation immigrant, so I was born in Nigeria, I've moved to the UK. So all the history that I learned growing up in school was through the lens of the UK. So even when we did learn about the history of other places, it was through that avenue. So like in museums, I never really picked up on the fact that the slave trade and slavery was brought up. They'd always refer to people as just slaves. They'd say like African slave. And whereas now the wording that is being used is enslaved people, enslaved person. And having these kinds of updates and differences that I think is really important, because in this particular example, it puts the emphasis and highlights how slavery is a process that is done to a person.
I just wanted to say as well, another way of excluding people is through, I guess, museums only focus on visuals. So with people with disabilities, it is not accessible. This is why it's important to have, I guess, sound as a way for people to experience things. Having headsets where people can listen to descriptions of the artwork that they can't see is really important. And I guess if we were able to do this throughout all museums, it would make it way more accessible for everyone as well.
From my experiences, I totally agree. But for me, in many national museum spaces, the exhibitions and labels are often categorized by the story of nation or the country or the success of a man, but they always neglect women's invisible labors or emotional harms. So I think it's also a part of the invisibility.
For me, loneliness often comes from being in environments where people don't understand my lived experiences. There have been times in my life when I've been surrounded by people but still felt disconnected because I have to explain myself in extreme detail for others to understand why situations were difficult for me. This links to why some people from the global majority may feel less desire to visit or engage with museums. Additionally, these institutions have been historically racist. This could be in regards to the unethical methods used to obtain the items that are in the museums and exhibits, and they can come from through colonial and imperial powers, and then they're also displayed in problematic ways. So for me, there's maybe been some South Asian exhibitions that I've seen that I guess are highlighting these items that they've looted from my home countries, Pakistan and India, and it's just weird to see these items there and the ways that they're displayed. And then this makes these places not welcoming spaces for people from ethnic minority backgrounds. If you don't see yourself reflected in the art or museums, you're going to struggle to connect with the space and it's not going to feel meaningful or welcoming at all. This isn't to say that all art has to reflect everyone's experiences, rather representation within museums should be more balanced and inclusive. When discussing representation, I also think it's important to move beyond acknowledgements of how artefacts and artworks were stolen from their lands. We should also seek opportunities to showcase works from artists who reflect the global majority to exhibit in these spaces for them to feel inclusive. So, for instance, a really good example for me is at Goma, the Gallery of Modern Art. I feel seen in Rabia Chowdhury's work, who is a South Asian queer artist from a Muslim household, and her work celebrates the work of her father, who was a shopkeeper, just like mine, and she has an artwork that is a neon sign which is outside the gallery. And this is a celebration of her father's work as a shopkeeper. And another piece that is within the museum really highlights his loneliness living in Glasgow in the 1980s, where racism was still around, and this really depicts his struggles with mental health. So I really admire her openness and her ability to be so vocal through her art. Historically, and still now in South Asian culture, mental health is not widely discussed through our communities. And there is this huge stigma surrounding the topic and how it unfortunately leads to this increased loneliness within our societies.
For me, that's another reason why being part of the ICY group has been such a positive experience, because we've had a safe space to talk about things openly and share experiences and discuss topics to do with our opinions on museums as well as our personal experiences.
During our time in the youth group together, we all communicate and converse, and it isn't just specifically on art and museums. It's also about life experiences without the requirements and additional explanations. We are also just young people that want to be able to find a space for ourselves in a sector that lacks representation. Art gives us the freedom to express ourselves. We can come up with proposals and ideas of workshops and events. We work collaboratively, helping each other out and showing up for one another. We've been able to share opinions, discuss challenges, and critique museum practice in a supportive environment.
To learn more about Glasgow museums in general, you can check out our Instagram at young Glasgow museums. And so far we've put together some really great workshops that have brought communities together. And one example is that for Black History Month, I co-hosted a workshop exploring identity through reflecting on the stories behind our names.
Yeah, and during Black History Month, we also had a Goma Late, and we had a workshop based on monoprinting, and everyone worked together to make sure that that workshop was successful. There was a lot of people that attended, so we all worked collaboratively. We were seen at the Glasgow Mela, the biggest South Asian festival to happen in Scotland. So we explored connections through Shash's Bench, and we also created South Asian prints that the public were welcome to take home for free.
Part of ICY, we've also had the opportunity to visit other museums and art galleries across Scotland, and most recently we went to the V&A in Dundee and we learnt about the history of tatrees there. It's a traditional hand embroidery technique used to decorate Palestinian dress, and they use very unique and elaborate patterns which each give us an insight into Palestinian culture, because each different design tells us about the person wearing the dress, what village they came from, or it can also indicate if they're in a state of mourning and different aspects of which stage of life they're in as well. One of the dresses on display as well had actually been salvaged from a museum that was bombed in Gaza, and this just really highlighted how important arts and heritage spaces can be in preserving culture, especially during the genocide, and especially when a culture is being actively erased and oppressed. I'm really into fashion, and also fashion history is something that has interested me for a little while, and in particular the fact that as much as cultural dress across the world is so diverse and there's so many variations, there can also be a lot of similarities. One thing that I found was that there were some parallels in terms of the silhouette of the dresses and also the designs used. It reminded me of West African bubu styles, and so bubus are commonly worn in different parts of West Africa, so like Nigeria, where I'm from, Ghana, other places as well.
And that connection also happens with, I guess, South Asian clothing as well, like in shalwar kameez and saris. A lot of the embroidery was like the same as in the tatrees as it is in those outfits in South Asian culture as well. And it was really interesting to see, I guess, how all the cultures have merged and how people have moved around, and immigration has led to these practices spreading throughout the continents.
In this way, groups like ICY can show how museums can actively work to reduce barriers and create inclusive programs that prioritize cultural participation and dialogue.
We've been talking about connection, but connection is also deeply linked to well-being. So let's turn now to the role museums and cultural spaces might play in supporting people's mental and emotional health.
Recent research highlights that engaging with arts and culture can support people's well-being. In some countries, this idea has even made its way into healthcare. Through what's sometimes called museum prescriptions, doctors may encourage patients to visit museum or galleries as a way to support their mental health and reduce feelings of anxiety, depression, or social isolation.
For me, I've noticed that many new mothers experienced isolation and emotional exhaustion. The child-centered social space often unintentionally marginalizes mothers and caregivers themselves. As a member of the ICY group, I organized a creative workshop through the Mothers Under the Frame program in Goma, creating a supportive space where caregivers could share experiences. Also, we used creative expression to re-image their identity and possibility beyond caregiving. I actually only joined the ICY group last year when I first came to a session. I felt quite nervous and a bit awkward. Everyone seems to know each other already. They were chatting, asking about each other's life, wishing each other well, and I felt quite reserved at first. At that time, I didn't have many friends in Glasgow, which sometimes made me feel quite isolated in my home. But as I kept coming to the activities and started talking to people more, things slowly changed. I realized that sometimes connection begins with a very small step. Just showing up, walking into a space, and saying the first hello. Once you do that, the world starts to open up to you as well. Programs like these shows how museums can become more than just space to look at art. They can also be spaces where people meet, collaborate, and build real connections.
Yeah, just to reiterate that it was through ICY that we were all able to meet. So even just this podcast episode is quite a diverse setup. You have me, Nigerian Muslim Mu'mina, also Iman from South Asian background, and Jessica from China.
Yeah, and if you're wanting to find out about more work that we're doing, you can follow us on our Instagram page at Young Glasgow Museums. We also have a very exciting exhibition at the Gallery of Modern Art, which will be opening at the Common Space, which is in Gallery 2, and this will be around mid-June, so you're welcome to come to that, and it's free for all, so please come and see our exhibition if you can.
Thank you so much, Iman and Momna, for your sharing. Art and culture won't solve loneliness on their own, but when they are truly open to everyone, they can help people connect and feel a little less alone. Thank you so much for your listening.